Hey everyone, Dr. Chad Frisch here. So we had talked about the 5 hidden foods that can increase inflammation in your body. But looking back, my mistake, I did not give you some alternatives. So we're going to talk about some alternatives to each of those 5 hidden foods. So number 1, we had talked about sugar and how pro-inflammatory that is. And it's not really hidden. We're aware that it can cause some problems, but it is extremely inflammatory. So some alternatives, we got a couple listed up here, but the first 2, berries and green apples, they're fruits that are a little bit lower on what's called a glycemic index and don't have quite as much sugar in them. The other benefits when you add in something with some sweetness, like berries, is you're going to get a lot of fiber, antioxidants, so there's a lot of other nutrition in there. But berries and green apples are 2 that don't have quite as much sugar as some of the other fruits. So if you're looking to keep that sugar lower, I consider adding those 2 in. I also put up a couple of vegetables, carrots and beets. So yeah, they're not as nice per se as some other things you could have, but the advantage of these are vegetables that have a little bit more sugar in them, so you can kind of satisfy that sweet craving. Okay, so those are some alternatives for sugar. The second thing we have is trans fat. So trans fat, again, is the fat that we were talking about, that you take a partially hydrogenated oil, or an oil, you inject it with hydrogen, and you create a liquid fat that becomes a solid fat. So examples were like vegetable oil, or peanut butter, margarine is another one. But we're going to go through some alternatives for that. So alternatives for trans fat, I would say stick with things that are going to be, I would probably stick with more of like a healthy saturated fat. So a good example would be something, I know this writing's not going to be as nice when I do it this way, like coconut oil, okay? Or another one could be grass-fed butter. Okay? So coconut oil has something called medium chain triglycerides, which can allow your body to produce more ketone bodies, which is very beneficial for your health. And grass-fed butter. So when you get a butter that's made not from a conventional cow, but from a grass-fed cow, there's a lot of what's called CLA, conjugated linoleic acid. But CLA is beneficial for, actually, some people take it for weight loss. But there's a lot of other beneficial components to having a grass-fed butter. So 2 healthy alternatives to cook with. Avocado oil would be another one. A lot of people use olive oil. Olive oil is a little bit better to add into things versus cook with. You could cook it with a lower temperature. Once it gets to higher temperature, it actually can turn to a trans fat. So I would stick with grass-fed butter, coconut oil, or what we just said, avocado oil. So I'd stick with those. Alternative to gluten. So gluten is that wheat protein. So alternative to gluten. So you can think of, there's a lot of different ways you can go with this. If you want to stick more of the vegetable realm, you could do an alternative, or you could do something that just doesn't have gluten, but it's going to be like maybe like a rice pasta, like a brown rice pasta or something like that. But alternatives, which you may have heard about, is like you could do a noodle alternative. You get this little thing called a spiralizer, and you can take like a zucchini and make little noodles with it. You could also do that with the sweet potato, make noodles with that one. So sweet potato is going to be a little bit more starchy for those that are trying to keep the carbohydrates lower, but still tons of beneficial nutrition in a sweet potato. One other one I was thinking of, can't come to me right now. We'll come back to that. Also flours, so like you could use a coconut flour as an alternative to something with gluten. Coconut flour, another example would be like an amaranth flour or quinoa flour, but probably the most popular would be almond flour. And you can make some great things with almond flour. It's a great alternative. You can buy like a huge bag of it at Costco, which is pretty inexpensive compared to other alternative stores. So that'd be a place that I would look for that. Also down here we have artificial sweeteners, which was number 4. So artificial sweeteners, those were, the Splenda, the I guess equal the aspartame, and then the saccharin, which is the sweet and low. So alternatives to those would be something like a stevia, and I have right here. So stevia, this is actually from Trader Joe's, this one here. So this is a liquid stevia. So I use this, I just add a couple drops to coffee. Now the thing is, like with stevia, it can be 150 to 300 times sweeter than sugar, kind of depending on how it's broken down and how it's made, because whether it be a liquid or a powder, or how it's extracted. So it's a lot sweeter. So you just need a little bit to be able to add into things. So this is something that you could utilize definitely in place of an artificial sweetener. Another example is a monk fruit, which is a fruit that, again, it's much sweeter. You can get a powder is the most common to get monk fruit, but that's another alternative to having an artificial sweetener. And then lastly, we talked about farmed fish. So farmed fish, examples of salmon. Another one I would try to stay away from is tilapia that's farmed, really high in omega-6s, pesticides, antibiotics, something called PCBs, which create inflammation. Alternative to that would be, obviously, when you're going with more of a wild caught, like a wild caught salmon, a cod. You do a mackerel. You can eat sardines, which have a lot of omega-3s for those people that can handle sardines. I love sardines, but it just depends on what you can handle or would like. But those are just some alternatives for those 5. I can't think of the other one I was going to think of. Oh, I think I got it written down here. Oh, listen. So carrot would be another noodle alternative. So you could take a carrot and spiralize that. So here are 5 alternatives that you could use to combat the 5 things that really are hidden and increase inflammation. So I hope this helps. We'll be back with more soon.